Welcome to a special edition of Experts in Sport, where we'll be talking to a range of practitioners from Loughborough University and beyond. We have guests discussing parasport, nutrition, sports technology, sports performance and more, as we focus on the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. Sports PR Officer Dan Trussell has carried out the interviews, which kick off with Professor Vicky Tolfrey, Professor of Applied Disability Sport and Director of the Peter Harrison Centre for Disability Sport. Vicky discusses parasport research, including the development of 3v3 wheelchair basketball, which will feature for the first time at the 2022 Games.
Vicky, if you just tell us a little bit about your research into 3-on-3 and why that's important.
It was leading into the Commonwealths where we knew that 3-on-3 was going to be at the Commonwealth Games, but what the International Wheelchair Basketball Federation hadn't done is really put an evidence base to the format. The running game for 3-on-3 is half court, but to date, at the time back in sort of 2016, then wheelchair basketball is 5-on-5 on a full court. And so what we had to do is just have some evidence base around trying to let the players, the coaches, building their insights into the research, as well as get some technical and tactical data to sort of just try and put some just sort of reinforcement to maybe saying, well, it could follow the same format as the running game, 3-on-3, which is half court, or whether or not we wanted to have sort of a modified court or traditional full-length court for the game.
Why is that important for the game as a whole?
Well, 3-on-3, obviously, for both the running game and the wheelchair game is very different because it's smaller squads. And so I saw that as a great opportunity in the world of parasport because some nations haven't got enough people with a disability who play wheelchair sport to put out a team to play the 5-on-5 game, particularly sort of developing nations where there's barriers around the technology, having decent wheelchairs. So I really wanted to engage in this research because I saw it as an exciting platform to try to get 3-on-3 on the world stage, not only at the Commonwealths, but at future events. So it does exist and did exist prior to the research. It's just that there was different formats being played, and what we wanted to do is actually really generate and have evidence to have two separate games, the 5-on-5 and the 3-on-3 wheelchair basketball.
And I guess within parasport and sport as a whole, a lot of that is about inclusivity and participation. So I guess with 3-on-3, that opens up loads of doors for many new people to get involved in the sport.
Yeah, I think that what we have seen actually even since London 2012 is there's a lot of pop-ups of wheelchair basketball seen at schools, seen in the local community, because people like myself love jumping in a chair and having a little go at trying to score a basket, which is extremely difficult, and a lot of people perhaps don't know that until they've had a go. But having the 3-on-3 format, it's quick, it's fast, it can be delivered at schools, it can be delivered out at sort of competition venues that might be the running game, but then trying to parallel and have sort of inclusive disability sports for young children with disabilities, for non-disabled school children, for the community, not even at school level, but for people of my age, just to enjoy a different format of a wheelchair game.
And let's just talk a little bit about kind of parasport as a whole at Loughborough. You must be extremely proud as somebody who's led that to see how it's developed over the past kind of, even 5 years?
Yeah, parasport at Loughborough University has really gone leaps and bounds over the last couple of years through the parasport strategy. But I'm really proud to sort of say that was embedded following the research here at Loughborough in parasport. I joined Loughborough in 2007. But now we've really had an impact, again, perhaps driven by London 2012 and the fact that the research for the Peter Harrison Centre is delivered out of the National Centre for Sport and Exercise Medicine. We've got tremendous lab, we've got tremendous community here at Loughborough. And not only has the research led to more staff wanting to sort of engage in the research, but we've got a local community feel around parasport at Loughborough.
And then just going back to kind of wheelchair basketball as well, you must have been really proud and happy to obviously see Lightning win the Premier League in the first ever year.
I followed Loughborough Lightning, the wheelchair basketball team, really with great excitement. I've been to matches, I've watched it on the BBC live platform, which again is a real good feature of what's happened around parasport. But again, Loughborough Lightning having that platform for other communities outside of Leicestershire to watch their games. They've travelled down to London, other places around the country. So yeah, it's been really fantastic to follow them. But what's the proudest really is seeing PhD students that are here within our school playing for Loughborough Lightning. So we've got Lindsay Spears, who has, again, really tremendously improved her performance. That has happened because of the ecosystem of Loughborough Sport, through George, the head coach, and really through the fact that we try to generate dual careers for athletes at Loughborough to study and to train.
And just took in kind of, you touched on Lindsay there, but obviously you deal with a whole host of athletes, both internally in the Loughborough bubble and externally. How proud are you as an individual to see those guys go on to kind of compete on the world stage?
Yeah, it's seeing the athletes who come into the lab or take part in our research to compete on the world circuit. It is great, but I don't take it for granted because I work at all levels of sort of wheelchair and para sport. It's great to see individuals who come into the laboratory and learn more about their health and well-being, as well as me guiding them to be an elite sports person, because they're perhaps elite sports person already, that's why they come into the laboratory. But then to see them have the success, come back with a silver or a gold medal, come back and achieve a personal best, is what sort of makes me feel really proud, is that the members of the Peter Harrison Centre are behind the scenes and are contributing to some of that success.
We saw the testing with Lindsay and Pippa previously. How important is that for the individual athlete, for them to go on to achieve those great things?
We work very closely with the national governing bodies within para sport. We work closely with the Loughborough Sport, Loughborough Lightning, and it's very important that we work as a team. And some of the work that we do then is sort of translated to the performance pathways of the athletes. It's embedded and used. We wouldn't be doing research if it wasn't used. And so I sort of really are driven by sort of doing performance-centred research, sort of athlete focused, coach sort of driven as such. So the questions that I do are really embedded in the pathway to performance.
Our next interview is with Jonathon Riall, Team England Triathlon team leader and Head of Performance Services at the British Paralympic Association. Jonathon covers his day-to-day role at a major championships and the importance of having a strong coach-athlete relationship.
Start from the very top. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your career development to date.
So up until very recently, the last 2 months, I was the head coach and team leader for the Para-Triathlon programme at British Triathlon, a role I held since 2009. Recently moved across to work at the British Paralympic Association as head of performance. So very much Paralympic focused up until my Commonwealth Games role and in a performance coach, team leader capacity.
We're here today kind of shooting things for the Commonwealth Games. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, incredibly excited. A home games, I guess, doesn't come around very often, might never come around again in my career. It was something that I was able to have an opportunity to be involved in Manchester. So for it to kind of come full circle from sort of volunteer into a team leader to lead the sport that I kind of was. I was a triathlete, did triathlon as a youngster, is a massive honour. So starting to feel the nerves and excitement to kind of all merge into one, but with 2 weeks to go, we're about there. So just looking forward to the experience, really.
And many of the athletes, obviously Loughborough based, they've come through the Peter Harrison Centre as well. How important has this facility been in the development of the sport?
It's been pivotal, really. So yeah, as you said, at Commonwealth Games, we'll have a mixture of Olympic and Paralympic athletes. So on the Paralympic side, we've got our visually impaired athletes, and it's a real mixture of experience and youth. So we've got an existing world champion and Paralympian in Dave Ellis and Luke Pollard. Yet we've got athletes who are coming through the talent pathway as well. The Peter Harrison Centre, to be honest, has played an incredibly pivotal supportive role within the Para-Triathlon programme, really reaching back to kind of 2012, 2013. And every year since, we've just grown that partnership, from it being quite an ad hoc supportive process all the way through to having master's students, PhD students embedded in, to ultimately those guys becoming full-time members of staff. So it's played an incredibly supportive role, both for me personally, but also for the team and the sport.
And obviously everyone talks about kind of the home games and wanting to hit the podium and to medal. How do you feel? What are your hopes for your athletes and for the sport?
Yeah, I mean, look, my hope for the athletes is that they go out and they achieve their best. And if they achieve their best, medals in every single race is a probability, not really a possibility. So I'm not going to say it wouldn't be a disappointment if we didn't achieve medals. I think from a coach's perspective, and it's something that I've said really throughout my time in all my roles, is we don't toe the start line. So our goal is not to go and medal. but ultimately our goal is to do our jobs to the very best of our ability. So we've got a quite an eclectic team actually, because it's a team that kind of comes in, gets parachuted in for a Commonwealth Games, and pretty much in a few weeks' time that team will go back to doing their day jobs. So my role all the way through to head coaches' roles to ops roles, they're sort of volunteer roles in essence. So we've had an amazing kind of year-long experience really, where we've just been able to articulate, okay, we can put our day job hat to one side. What's our role at Commonwealth Games? And then how do we do these roles to the best of our abilities? And I think the question that I asked really early on was, what do you want to get out of Commonwealth Games? What do you want to try and deliver that maybe you don't have the space to deliver in a day job role, with all of the overlay that kind of standard big programs carry? So we've set ourselves some pretty personal but ambitious standards, whether that is in athlete communication, athlete welfare, the environment, the way we enjoy the event, the way we engage friends and family. It's a home games at the same time. So we've got quite a few things that we really want to deliver, which are nowhere near medals, but hopefully they'll just add to the experience that the athletes have in Birmingham in front of their friends and family. And then, yeah, very much on the field of play in Sutton Park.
I guess from the outside in, the general public won't see that.
Yeah.
Do you feel the pressure?
Yeah, I think we always do. But I think it's how you interpret that pressure and what behaviours you then go on to display. You know, it's like you said, it's a lot of the time. I think what people think of as coaches or team leaders are telling people what to do, or coaches stand with stopwatches and shout at athletes. And actually, the reality of it is far from it. You're engaged in a really personal journey, which is really challenging at times. Comes with some real highs and lows. So the pressure for me is about the behaviour that our entire team display every day, good or bad. We should be there being a really positive support to the athletes. The environment we set up, we've been really lucky enough to base ourselves out of a hotel right next to Sutton Park, you know, so the relationship we build with the hotel and the environment we create and how that feels from the second that the athletes walk through the door is our job. So I guess our pressure starts pretty soon in the next few days really, when athletes start to come into camp. Ironically, I think as you get closer to the games, that pressure starts to pull back a bit, and you hand it over to the athletes so they go and do their job really. So pressure, excitement, but we've got to be accountable to the environment and the support we give to those guys.
And do you have to adapt your style and your approach for different athletes, or is it very much kind of a blanket approach for the programme?
That's a really good question. I think we have some pretty established principles of what we're about. And it's something as a staff team, I think across triathlon in reality, not necessarily just Commonwealth Games, across Olympic and Paralympic triathlon. If you ask anybody, they could probably articulate what the general principles of the way we work are. But athletes are people and they're individuals, so if you can't adapt that style, it's what might work for one person wouldn't work for the other. So like I said, obviously I've worked Paralympic programme, Peter Harrison Centre has supported that journey for the best part of my career. But whether they're a Paralympic athlete, an Olympic athlete, a Commonwealth Games athlete, they're still just people. I've never really seen anything which is specific to the programme they're on. So yeah, you absolutely have to adapt that style. Some people need more support, some people need a bit more of a push, but it's on us to know the athletes we're leading and give them that level of flexibility, I guess.
So fast forward kind of a few days in the future at the Commonwealth Games, it's race day. How are you preparing?
We've got a pretty well-established plan already. So we've got races across, it's across 3 days, races on 2 days, Friday and Sunday. We've got a camp which begins on Monday in a few days' time, so we'll be in camp for the best part of 2 weeks. And ultimately it's about us having the most well-oiled plan every day, but having the flex, because things will always change. Triathlon, there's always something that comes up, whether that's weather or format of a race, if the weather's too hot or too cold, etc. So we've always got to remain fairly adaptable. We've been through a lot of those processes. Really good plan, staff knowing exactly what they're there to do, athletes knowing exactly what the staff are there to do, being consistent with what we've said we're going to deliver. It sounds really kind of boring actually, but you know, we've got some fantastic coaches, we've got some fantastic athletes. We don't need to be pushing the envelope at this stage. It's just about knowing what athletes want and making sure we've got the plans in place to deliver it. And I'm pretty confident, I think, at this stage that we're ready to go and do that.
You mentioned home games, so a lot of people will be obviously watching it. What advice would you give to kind of aspiring young coaches who are looking to break into sport?
You could probably tell from some of the things I've already mentioned. I think coaching is a skill. It's something that you can be really, really good at. It's something you can not be that great at. But what I've found is actually the level of coaching skill isn't always matched to the performance of an athlete on a given day or the number of medals you win. And consistency, it's the same as what you would tell an athlete. Just understand what your job is there to do. Understand yourself, actually, because coaches can deliver their skill in a number of different ways. So understanding yourself, understanding your role absolutely inside out, and just working day to day to do it a bit better, whether that is the way you interact with athletes, the way you engage with athletes, the way you create your programming, the way you create your sets, the way you deliver your sets, the energy you bring. Like, they're all things you can control. Ultimately, when an athlete goes out and toes the start line, you don't control that hour or 2 hours. You certainly control how you debrief it, how you plan, how you review, and how you move forward again. So I think for me, a lot of the time, people jump to the success that an athlete has had to kind of derive their sense of value or their success, and the two are not always matched. So yeah, understand your role and just work to get better at it. Surround yourself with other really good people who are willing to challenge you. I think that's certainly what I've had working with the guys at the Peter Harrison Centre and within the British Triathlon programme. They'll challenge you to do things better. You work together through that as a team. So just surround yourself with good people and know what you're there to do, really.
I was reading the other day that it's a very personal endeavour, so you could be with the best coaches in the world, but your style has to be bespoke. How true do you think that is?
Yeah, look, I think when you're coaching at an elite level, I think the difference between what you might do there versus what you might do in a club or a kind of an amateur setting is you have to go through the journey from start to finish with an athlete. It's a really emotive and at times really challenging journey to go through. So if you're not authentic through that, you're going to get found out really quickly. Your style will not be able to cope with pressure, with disappointment, all of that side of things. So I think that comes back to my point about if you know yourself truly, you're able to then be better at what you do, but still hold on to that authenticity, really. And like I said, there's a million ways you can coach, and success can come from all of them. So yeah, understanding how you do it best and trying to get kind of even better at that is probably the angle I would come from.
Rounding off our parasports section of the show is our chat with Ben Stephenson, Research Assistant in Sports Performance at Loughborough University. Ben talks about his experiences at the Tokyo Paralympic Games and how research and innovation is driving parasport forward.
We're here in the Peter Harrison Centre today. Tell us a little bit about how important the research is which is conducted here.
It's absolutely massive. It's huge for disability sport and for Paralympic sport. The work that the centre has done over the last probably 10, 15 years through the support of the Peter Harrison Foundation has really advanced the knowledge of Paralympic sport from a fairness perspective, whether it's regards to classification, whether it's regards to athlete performance and driving on athletes' standards, or whether it's to do with athlete safety during competition, so something like competing in the heat. It's been absolutely fundamental to driving on Paralympic sport at elite end, but also increasing knowledge of how people with disability can stay active and live a healthy lifestyle.
And why is that important for individual athletes?
Ultimately, we're supporting athletes to be the best that they can be, and we feel that Paralympic athletes potentially don't have as much resource or as much opportunity to support their career and to support their physical and sort of sporting development. So the work that we have done really just playing a small role in helping athletes to strive on their standards and to be the best they can be and the best that any Paralympic athlete can be.
And we've seen many Paralympic athletes come through the Peter Harrison Centre to compete on the world stage. How proud are you when you see those guys?
It is great. Probably lost track now as to how many athletes that the foundation and centre has supported over the last God knows how many Paralympic Games. There's definitely a sense of personal pride in that. I think we fully understand that we play such a small role in their development over the many years of their career, but it's still very satisfying to see athletes go onto the world stage, to go onto the Paralympic Games and go onto the podium, knowing that we were a small part of that journey.
And obviously, as part of that is the collaboration with national governing bodies. Mm-hmm. And how important is that to keep those relationships strong?
It's huge. We've got such strong relationships with a lot of governing bodies in the UK now. yeah, we've worked with the likes of wheelchair rugby, wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis, para-triathlon, just to name a few, even in the last couple of years. And the support that we have and the connection that we have with those national governing bodies, like I say, it helps us help them, really. So we can work together to support athletes from a career perspective, whether it's sporting performance, whether it's transition after sport, and whether it's performance or whether it's health. We feel like there's only benefits to be had when we work closely with those national governing bodies.
And we talked off camera about you being out at the Paralympics in Tokyo. Just tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, Tokyo was great. It was great. There's no denying that. It's not potentially what it could have been. I think we can't get away from the fact that the measures put in place from a COVID perspective that, to be really honest, were managed so well, but they did take that little bit of shine off. And I think potentially Japan lost the opportunity to showcase what it could have been. Fundamentally still an amazing experience and something that I wouldn't ever change. But if anything, yeah, it's just an added bit of motivation and add a bit of excitement for when we come forward to Paris in a couple of years' time. But yeah, still such a special occasion.
We've spoken to many athletes about how they prepare for race day and coaches as well, but how about kind of a research associate who's behind the scenes but obviously plays a key part? Well, how's your race day look?
So in Tokyo, part of my role was being in and around athletes' warm-up areas. So I was supporting athletes basically from the moment they arrived at the race venue through to the period when they start the race. So making sure that their timings are correct when it comes to warm-up, when it comes to fueling, even when they go to the toilet, to be honest. So really just trying to take some of that cognitive load out of athletes in the couple of hours before potentially the biggest race of their life, and being able to coordinate where they're going and hopefully provide a bit of a sounding board and a bit of a navigation system as to what they should be doing, so they can focus solely on swim, bike and run.
Do you feel the nerves or do you let them do that?
A little bit. I can't lie. There was a little bit of nerves before the races out in Tokyo last year, but I think it's nerves and it's excitement. Being able to see that the journey that athletes have been on for whether it's the 5 years since Rio or even before then, being able to see their journey, see the work that's been put in, and see how much it means to them. There is a bit of an excitement that this is the opportunity to showcase it. But yeah, there was butterflies.
Obviously at the Commonwealth Games in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to have many athletes who have been through the Peter Harrison Centre. How are you feeling about seeing them on the world stage at home games at that? Yeah,
it's going to be great. It's the first home games since 2012, so they don't come around every day. So it is different. There's no denying that. There'll be a lot of people there. There'll be some really passionate and some really excited crowds, and to be able to see athletes again step onto the world stage in a different environment, wearing their home nation's kit, which is something, like I say, we don't get to do every day. It's just as special, and we're two years out now from the next Paralympic Games. It's a nice chance for athletes to see where they're tracking towards that. But yeah, it will be great popping down 45 minutes down the road to be able to see athletes competing, hopefully winning medals, and knowing that we supported them from here. It's going to be really special.
Next up is Chris McLeod, an expert in eating behaviour. Chris discusses elite athletes' food planning at events away from their usual training base, and how new environments at major championships can influence performance.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Chris McLeod. I'm an expert in eating behaviour. So in general, my research looks to better understand our eating behaviours to reduce disease risk and improve public health. I've been at Loughborough for 6 years, and personally I can't think of many places that are better to do the research that I do. We have amazing facilities here, and the wish to do world-class research is incredibly high here, and I think it's only getting stronger as well, that we're wanting to do more and more. We want to do more and more internationally, and the areas that we specialise in fit with my desires as well, with my research, so seems a good fit for me.
Excellent. And obviously we're kind of meeting today to talk about the Commonwealth Games and where your research kind of fits into the wider space within that as well. So you're going to tell us a little bit to start with, what are some of the important factors for athletes to consider regarding their eating behaviour in the build-up and during major championships?
Well, something with major championships which is different to sort of everyday behaviours is you're going into a novel context. And a context that you don't really know that well. It's likely that you won't have visited there beforehand. Sometimes some of the athlete villages are just constructed specifically for those that major competition. So there's a disruption to eating behaviour routines. And that can be about when you eat food, which foods you choose, the amount of foods that you sort of choose. And all of those factors can come in to, as I say, make this disruption to your eating behaviour, and that can have an effect on the nutrient delivery to you as an athlete to fuel your activity and also recover from it as well. So things to think about beforehand are really trying to understand what will change. What are is it related to timings? Is it related to the location? When is your race day? When is the performance time? See if you can get as much knowledge as you can about what your behaviours will be and what the environment will be like in the athlete village. And I think if you can do that, you might be on a little bit better footing to perform as best as you can.
And if there's changes within that environment, is there potential for that to impact on that performance?
Yes. Some things are more obvious in that if you're changing, well, to me they're more obvious anyway. If you're changing your timings that you're going to be eating because of when your competition day is, then you might get out of the routine that you know is tried and tested. You know, a lot of athletes have their way of doing things and the foods that they like to have. And if you're getting out of that routine, you might not have the right amount of nutrition in terms of the nutrients delivered to your body at the right times for you to perform as best you can on competition day. And then if you have an event that has multiple sort of sessions, you also then might impair your recovery afterwards as well. So all in all, it can be that it can impact your performance, and it's not just about a discomfort about changing routines. It actually can have a knock-on impact.
And I guess in that context as well, that maybe as an athlete, as a coach, as a practitioner for that athlete, there's not much you can do to change things, but how do you minimise that disruption?
Yeah, the change in behaviours, the change in your routine is not something you can control. So you have to try and understand what is most important to control. Control what you can. And do as much knowledge gaining as you can before the competition, as far before the competition as you can. So where is the athlete dining centre? What foods, if you can find this out, what foods are going to be offered? When are the sittings? Is there a specific time of day that you have to go, or is it a 24-hour environment? And see if you can go even further to find out, you know, what's it like within the actual eating area. Is it long tables? Is it circular tables? The more you can find out, the more you can then plan in relation to when your event is. And so I think trying to work out how your everyday routines or every week routines that make you perform as best, or athletes perform as best as they can fit into this novel context with this new structure that we have in a major sporting competition. That's the best way that athletes and their coaches, I think, can combat the change that they'll have.
Excellent. So just looking at that mealtime setting, what factors can influence eating behaviour?
There are many things that can influence eating behaviour within a context. So I'll name a few. The number of people that you're eating with and that are eating around you, and also the relationship of those people to you. So yeah, that's one factor. Another one is the lighting within the room and ambient noise. So whether it's absolutely quiet. I think I can think of situations where I'm eating when it's absolute silence and you eat really slowly and you don't really want to make a lot of noise because it's social norms sort of playing into that. But if it's a louder environment or if there's certain music, then you feel certain ways, and it can influence the speed of your eating, for example. The speed of your eating can then influence how much of that food you eat. In total, that can influence how filling the food is and how long it staves off hunger for. Then we've got other factors, the crockery, the size of the plates, the colour of the plates and the bowls, the size of the cutlery that you're eating with. All of these factors are significant influences on our eating behaviours as in regard to how quickly we eat, as I said, and how much of that food we eat and how full we feel. And I think an important thing to say is that there aren't that many of these factors that influence our eating behaviour that we are explicitly, consciously aware of at the time. A lot of these factors influence us implicitly, and they still do. We're not deliberately thinking about them. So with that in mind, there are still only a certain number of variables that you can control, because only a certain amount of them are within your sort of calculus of conscious experience of that specific moment. But yeah, there are many things within a moment that will influence our eating behaviours.
Just to touch on that point again, how important is it to identify those factors, or is it okay to almost kind of let it brush over you? Or could it go the other way, and could you start kind of analysing every minute detail and thinking this isn't normal, or is that not really a problem?
The analysis of the moment to the absolute tiniest detail is the academics and researchers' problem to do. That's what we try to do, to try to understand the context in as much detail as we can. Secondary to that is it's the coach's, I think, position, or the nutritionist position, to try to understand that information. The athlete, though, whilst they want to be aware of the changes that are going to be happening and try to work with the coach, really the athlete at that point wants to try and focus on the higher level, most important things that they need to think about there, and not to get as stressed about the tiny little things that can't be controlled. And there are certain people, certain athletes that will affect more than others. We don't want to try and control every single thing. It's trying to, as I say, gather knowledge about the context as much as possible, knowing what will influence and what won't, what things you can control, and what are the most important things to try and control to factor in for your performance.
Excellent. So if you just touch on as well, what are some of the eating challenges that somebody could face outside of that usual environment?
Yeah, so I mean, I've mentioned all of those factors that I talked about, that just changing the context can have a change in the environmental factors around you, and say whether that's cutlery, lighting, etc. But there's research that colleagues and myself are doing here at Loughborough, looking at how context influences various parts of our eating behaviour. So we've seen that if you eat a food that you know and that you like, in an unusual context, you may actually pay more attention to that food within that given moment. When you pay attention to food, it's likely that you eat it slower, because you start to think, either you start to appreciate the food more, or if it's in a novel context, if it's in a really novel context, I give the example of something like pasta at breakfast time or something like that, you may think, this is a bit odd, I'm not quite sure how I feel about this. How does it taste? Am I enjoying this? That may make you eat it slower. You may perceive the food actually to be more filling than you do when you eat it in a normal context. And all of that together can lead to you eating less of the food as well. So yeah, that's something that a novel context, and that's new research that's sort of coming out at the moment, looking at how each of these contexts can influence our eating behaviours, and how that novel context can really have an impact on how much we eat.
So this may not be relevant for Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, but say if you're an athlete going to major championships overseas where the cuisine's different, I'm thinking off the top of my head somewhere like Japan or somewhere more far-flung, if you like, could that play a part if you're eating foods which you're not necessarily familiar with day to day?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of athlete villages and athlete canteens now do cater really well for cuisines across the world. And that's the right thing to do. We want to make sure that athletes can perform as best they can, and athletes are born and train where they are born and where they train. They should be able to eat the foods that they have at home, and I do think it should be the responsibility of the organising event to put on the foods that athletes will have within their normal environments. Now, not to the specific brand of snack bar that person might have, but to think about different cultures is really important. But still, when you're going to a completely different environment, so your example of somewhere in Asia, for example, versus the UK, there may be different traditional norms as well around eating, how you eat in terms of the table setting and how foods are served, whether it's a buffet, whether it's offered to the individual, how much choice they have on portion selection, and yeah, these can all massively influence the nutrient delivery again. Yeah.
So I guess that would be similar for Birmingham in the context of portion sizes, and I'm thinking for overseas athletes coming up, flipping on its head, for those coming to Birmingham from Asia, South America, the States, or wherever it may be, they're going to have the similar challenges as if it was for a British athlete going elsewhere.
Yeah. I would hope that Birmingham have done as much as they can, and I'm sure they have, to ensure that there is a variety of foods available. But even when we're trying to, as I was saying earlier, trying to get as much knowledge about this new environment for athletes to try and do that before they come, we've seen that COVID-19, for example, can have a massive impact on people trying to gain that knowledge. I think originally the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham were going to have a specific athlete village created and with a specific eating canteen area, but that's been changed in more recent times, and now they're starting to thinking about using student halls and having a little bit of a prefabricated block for the food and everything like that. So even then, these behaviours are changing based on the wider social context as well. So it is hard for athletes to try and nail this as best as they can.
Do you think athletes are aware of these factors when they go to major championships, or do you think it just kind of washes over them when they're focusing on game time?
It will depend on the athlete for sure. I think for most athletes, they won't be that aware of the tiny details that I was talking about, the size of the cutlery, for example, the size of the plate maybe. I don't think many will be aware of those things. Some will, but even those that will, because when they're going into that athlete canteen for the first time, they're thinking about, where do I stand in the queue? Where's the line? Where do I go sit? Where's the water? Do I get my coffee first, or do I get it afterwards? Do I get some fruit for dessert? They're thinking about all of those more practical elements. So they won't, I don't think, be thinking about the smaller things. I think it's, as I say earlier, I think it's the coach's role really to try and work with the athlete to make sure that the factors that will be influencing them are as diminished as possible.
I guess that leads to kind of shining a light on how important those support teams are, rather than just, this is how quick you must run. It's all those little bits which perhaps even the athlete doesn't see, but all gives them that extra 1% or whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's exactly, and that's where we're going to with athletic performance, isn't it? It's that tiny extra % that you can do that's helping you more than another athlete. But always have to remember, the more that you add in, the more complex the system that you're working within, and that can make things quite difficult. The more moving parts you're trying to include, sometimes that can become a little overwhelming for an athlete and for a team. And if you don't focus on the sort of the larger scale, the main practical issues of when's my race, things like that, then you're not seeing the wood from the trees, I guess. So yeah, it's good to get that extra 1% by understanding more, but still take a step back as well.
I know when I get nervous, I don't want to eat. So say if you've got somebody who's kind of doing their big race on Thursday morning, they know it's coming up, there's a big medal chance, but they just don't want to eat, don't want to consume their calories. What would you do about that? Or is that basically you just have to let the body do what the body's doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had this actually the other day when someone asked me about this exact thing in the moment. Firstly, that moment of nerves, it probably won't be the person's first time they've experienced it. So they'll know how they do with eating or not eating in that situation.
Yeah.
The advice that I have given and gave to this person recently, and they were about to perform in the evening and they'd felt nauseous all day. They had their normal breakfast, which was a berry smoothie with a protein scoop. And then they'd had lunchtime, they were having a homemade chili con carne, no rice, just with the chili and sort of lettuce. So, you know, good starts to the day, good staple foods, but they only ate half of that. And they didn't have anything snack in the morning, and then they didn't have any snack in the afternoon, and they were feeling nauseous and didn't want to eat before the performance in the evening. And they said, do I need to eat? I don't want to eat, I feel a bit sick. And I said, well, if you had to, what would you want to have if you could have anything? And they said, well, I'd probably be able to drink something. And I said, okay, would you have a smoothie that you had at breakfast with berries and you know, something like that? I said, yeah, I could probably go for a drink, but I don't want to eat anything. So I said, okay, well, let's go with that then, because that's something for them that they knew was going to be helpful to them. And you know, if they'd said, I'd like a Big Mac with fries, I'd probably say, and they were going for a specific type of event that wasn't helpful for that, let's say, I wouldn't have said yes. But for that, I thought pragmatic solution in the moment. And so we went with that, and they did really, really well with it. So yeah, there's pragmatics at that point, but not. It is a difficult one because it does depend on the person as well and the event that they're doing.
I suppose, and as a researcher who's kind of looked into this situation quite in depth, what advice would you give to athletes going out to major championships?
Try to get as much knowledge under your belt about the new situation that you're going into as possible. Whether that is the specific eating environments, you know, where is the canteen going to be in relation to your where you're staying for the competition, to what foods are going to be on offer, and whether there's sittings in terms of when you are able to eat. I think that knowledge acquisition is really important. I think also trying to work with your team to establish what are the really important things that you can sort of control as best as you possibly can is a really helpful thing. But also understanding that you can't control everything, but being able to plan within with better knowledge is always better than going in blind, especially when things really can influence you and can influence the nutrient delivery to your body and thus influence your performance.
And obviously, as with all of us as human beings, home comforts are important when we're doing whatever we do. So how important is it for those guys to take those treats or those things from the no work, you know, that food work can store in the fridge and that kind of thing? How important is that?
Yeah, it is important to do. There are athletes have their tried and tested routines. They know the foods that work for them. They know the foods that they like. It's the same with all of us, you know. And trying to keep things that are similar to that home environment when you're in a very new context is really, really important. So yeah, understanding whether you can take certain snack bars because you can store them in your room is a really good thing to understand, and then deliver, do that, and see what you can't, you know, what you don't have access to. Do you have access to a fridge? If you don't, you maybe can't take the specific type of milk that you want to have, and then you need to see how you can acquire that when you're actually on site. So yeah, I would say that is important to do as well.
Moving on to psychology, Dr. Dave Fletcher talks about dealing with pressures of home games and how it can affect athletes' performance.
Dave, we're here on the eve of the Commonwealth Games. What does the home games, what pressure does that give to athletes?
I think one of the main pressures around the home games is the expectation of the crowd, the supporters, your family, your friends. But what the athletes and the coaches really need to remember is the positive aspects of that. So it's actually the support. They want you to do well, they want you to perform at your best, they want you to enjoy the experience. So it's really focusing on the positive aspects of the crowd and the cheering and all of those things that go with it. And the bottom line is most elite athletes are looking for that edge to perform at their best. Well, the data supports the idea that if you've got a home crowd, you will perform better. So it's as simple as that. If you could choose whether you'd have it or you wouldn't have it, everyone will go for a home crowd.
So it's only kind of 12 months since Tokyo with the pandemic. We're now at another major championship. For those athletes who perform well in Japan and perhaps medalled and hit the podium, is there pressure for them to do it again?
Yeah, I think for any elite athlete who's been successful in the past, there'll be certain expectations and pressures that go with that. And of course, with Tokyo Olympics being so recent, then that'll be the thing that people are focused on in terms of their recent results, and that will bring pressure and expectations. But also from a psychological perspective, I think every athlete would take that success going into another major competition. It gives you that confidence, it gives you that edge, if you like, over your competitors, and that belief that you can succeed at the highest levels.
We've been speaking to a few athletes who are kind of on the upward trajectory, they're kind of hitting their kind of peak performance, but they find themselves competing against their idols. What advice would you give for them from a psychological perspective with imposter syndrome and competing against these guys who they perhaps once looked up to?
If I'm working with one of these athletes who's on an upward trajectory and they're really performing well and they're breaking onto the scene, the thing that I'm focusing on is that success. It's not necessarily their opponents. Some of them may be looking over and seeing some of their idols that they're competing against. They may have this element of imposter syndrome where they're not sure whether they really belong at that top level. But as a sports psychologist, what I'm focused on is what have you achieved to get there and what are the strict standards in getting into the competition. So there's nobody there making up the numbers at this level. They've earned their right to compete against the best athletes in the world. So for some of the athletes who are breaking onto the scene and they're competing against some of the biggest names in their sport, you've got to remember that these athletes have got a lot of pressure on them, particularly the ones that have delivered in the past. Some of these athletes as well may have struggled a bit through the pandemic, and that may have affected their preparations for this competition. So I think it's fair to say that all's up for grabs at this level of competition.
Looking ahead to race day as well, Dave, how best do these athletes prepare themselves psychologically when they know they're going to hit heats and then finals, perhaps sometimes in the same day?
Yeah, for any elite athlete, their psychological preparation is very much embedded in their physical preparation. If they've had good training blocks and they've achieved all their goals and personal bests in training, then that really sets the solid foundation going forwards for their competitions. Then as sports psychologists, we come in and we try and add some psychological skills to that. We've talked about visualization, goal setting. These skills are used to really emphasize the successes that they've had in their past and in their training. One of the areas of psychological preparation that doesn't get talked about that much for elite athletes is the what-if scenario planning. So what if this happens, what am I going to do? And here you're considering positive things that might happen. So if I have a success in one event, what am I going to do to prepare for the next event? But you're also looking at rather mundane things that might go wrong. What if I get on the wrong bus to the wrong venue, for example? What if my goggles snap before a race? What if I have problems with my equipment? So it's trying to foresee all the different scenarios that may occur and planning around those.
Can certain athletes, can you overthink it when you're on a major champs?
So one of the dangers at this level of competition is overthinking things and reflecting on things too much. What you're striving for is a mental state where you just execute things automatically. So this is where pre-performance routines come into things. So you'll observe in a lot of the top athletes, they'll go through the same rituals and habits leading into the competition. And what they're trying to do is automate processes so that when they get in the heat of the battle, the heat of the moment, that they just execute things as they would do normally. So one of the stories that gets talked about is the centipede who was asked, how do you coordinate the movement between your 100 different legs? The centipede stopped, thought about it and promptly fell over.
Looking at Adam Peaty, he's been in Strictly, he's had injury problems. What pressures are on him to come back and perform at major championships?
So an athlete like Adam Peaty always has pressure and expectations surrounding his performance in major championships, and leading into these major championships there are a few really significant unknowns for him. Obviously coming off the back of Strictly Come Dancing and the injury that he sustained as well, his disruption hasn't been ideal, and he'll be a little bit uncertain about how he's performing both in training and with limited competition experience. But someone like Adam is so experienced that he'll be able to focus on the aspects of his training and preparation that he knows that he needs to execute really well to perform at his very best.
In the same situation, will his opponents now be perhaps smelling a little bit of blood and seeing an opportunity there which perhaps wasn't there with Adam's injury?
I think fans of the sport will be really intrigued because Adam's performance is a little bit of an unknown going into this competition, and some of his rivals, they may be looking over thinking now may be my opportunity to take down Adam and lay down a marker coming into the next Olympic Games. So as I say, as fans we're going to be really intrigued as to what the outcome's going to be here. I think an athlete like Adam, he'll just be focused on his performance, not too worried about his rivals. And I think most of his rivals, while they'll sense there's a bit of an opportunity, they'll know ultimately that they are going to have to perform at their best and probably better than they've ever performed before, even just to get close to Adam.
And how important or not important is it for his opponents to not look at what Adam's saying or not look what he's doing in the press, to actually, pardon the pun, but to kind of focus on their own race?
I mean, for any top-level athlete, probably the worst mistake that you can make leading into a high-level competition is to focus too much on your rivals. It's all about focusing on the things that you can control as an athlete and as a performer. So what are those small incremental steps that you can make in your training, your nutrition, your psychology to make sure that you can perform at your very best and give you that chance to take down other athletes? So the key for any top-level athlete on race day itself is to stay focused on yourself. Don't look at your opponents, stay focused on what your tactics are and execute them to your very best of your abilities.
And finally, Professor Mike Caine, Associate Pro Vice Chancellor for Sport and Professor of Sports Technology and Innovation at Loughborough University. Mike discusses the latest technology in running shoes, offering advice and expertise on how to choose the correct footwear for you. He also touches upon how research and development has shaped the sector.
Mike, let's start from the very top. Why are running shoes important?
Yeah, a lot of people ask why are running shoes important. I think it's a multifaceted question. Now, at the most basic level, it's to give comfort and support, particularly if you're running in an outdoor environment, which most people are most of the time. So it's a hygiene factor.
And there's thousands of running shoes out there. How do you pick the right one for you?
Yeah, there's so much choice, isn't there, in running shoes that it can feel overwhelming in terms of making a choice. I think the key thing to recognise is most of the running shoes that you can buy are of a similar quality. You know, it's difficult to make a bad choice, such as the sort of state of competitiveness in the industry. I think the other thing to recognise is, what are your drivers? What do you want most out of a running shoe? Is it comfort? Is it durability? You know, do you want your shoes to wear a long time? Are you looking for performance advantage, to set a particular personal best or to compete at an elite level? Think about whether you pronate or supinate. You know, do you have particular gait idiosyncrasies that mean you need some correction within your footwear? And think about what you want to look and feel like. You know, how important is the aesthetic of the shoe? And perhaps what's your budget? How much do you have available to spend? So I think as a consumer or as an athlete, just being really clear about what you want from a running shoe before you go into making a purchasing decision.
And we're sat here today on the eve of the Commonwealth Games, just a week away. How important is getting the right shoe for the athletes who'll be competing there in Birmingham?
Yeah, if we start to think about elite performance, and got World Athletics on at the moment, we're on the cusp of the Commonwealth Games. I think it gets really interesting because for those athletes it's all about performance, and we know that with advances in modern footwear innovations, if you're not making an informed choice, you can be losing an advantage compared to your competitors. So I'm thinking particularly about the most recent innovations where there are probably 3 overlapping innovations coming into the shoe design. The first is more emphasis on lightweight, high energy return foams. So there have been innovations in the midsole, not only in the material but in the thickness. You're probably seeing thicker midsoles within the shoes. But the key innovation there is that there's less energy loss. So the foam is working in a way that it's reducing the amount of loss as the foot impacts the ground, and the amount of energy return through the foot propulsion is increased as a result compared to more traditional foams. The second key element is that we're adding stiffening plates into the midsole. Often these are carbon plates or very thin structures. A number of brands have gone down adding rods into the shoe, but they all do the same thing. Essentially what we find is at the point where the toes meet the rest of the foot, it's called the metatarsal phalangeal joint, we have significant energy loss. If you think about it, that's a hinge point. And if you can stiffen that hinge or make it more continuous, you're effectively changing the biomechanical lever of the foot. And that's really helpful in improving reducing the energy loss through that bending point. So the stiffer the plate, the more energy return you get through the propulsion part of the foot strike. And the third innovation is around having highly structured stabilizing uppers that are made from very lightweight constructions. So typically modern knitting technologies allow reinforcement to go into there without adding weight. So when you put all that bundle of technology together, we've got lightweight footwear with very springy foams with stiff midsoles through plates that make the shoe more efficient. It's essentially about reducing energy loss. People talk about the kind of spring effect to the shoe, and in some ways that's correct, but it's not so much that you gain energy, it's that you reduce the energy lost. And we know that these types of shoes are definitely giving performance advantage. You know, you'll appreciate that the brands promote the fact that they do, but the scientific research and the academic studies are now really backing that up. Anywhere from 1% right up to 4%. What's really interesting is it's not the same for every athlete. So we find that overall, female athletes benefit more, probably because they are lighter weight, and so the stiffness of the plate is disproportionately greater for the athlete when normalized for body mass. And similarly, the bounciness of the foam is giving more of an advantage per kilogram of body mass. This phenomenon is not yet well understood, but I think it is recognized that different athletes benefit to different degrees. And that's only, that gets you to the point where you're thinking, well, how might an athlete then understand which technology specifically might benefit them the most? And that's where the sort of science and research comes into it.
And just further on from that, how important is it for those athletes on the starting blocks to be comfortable in those shoes and to know their footwear?
Yeah, so I've talked a lot about technology and innovations and performance, and on one level that's really important, but I think regardless of whether you're elite or recreational runner, you want to feel good in your footwear. I mean, what we know is from all of the research that the most important factor is the comfort of the shoe. Does the shoe fit correctly? Is it the right width? Is it the right length? And importantly, do you feel good about yourself when you're wearing the shoe? Simple things like the colorway. And the brands, of course, put a massive amount of effort into how does the shoe feel when you first put it on, and how do you look, the silhouette of the shoe, the kind of geometry of the shoe, because they recognize that consumers are swayed by that behavior, and even elite athletes, when you think about the importance of confidence and self-belief, know that they run quicker, or they believe that they run quicker if they look good in the shoe and they feel good in the shoe. So the psychology and consumer behavior is really important.
Excellent. And just to bring it back kind of to Loughborough itself, so Loughborough is obviously world renowned for leading the way in sports tech. Tell us a little bit about the journey of sports tech at Loughborough and what kind of we've done as an institution to help drive forward the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to be sitting here as a professor of sports technology at Loughborough. I mean, we're privileged to work with very many of the brands that produce the footwear and indeed the technical athletic apparel. And of course it's evolved. I think perhaps there's as much interest now as there's ever been. I think there's been some breakthrough innovations that we at Loughborough were part of. I mean, certainly within the Sports Technology Institute, we worked for a number of years on the stiffening plates, doing a lot of fundamental work using additive manufacturing technologies, often called 3D printing technologies, so that we could change the bending stiffness of the shoes and see how different athletes responded to that in terms of power production, using kind of biomechanics, things like force plates and motion analysis systems, so that we could quantify the changes in joint responses, thinking about power produced at the ankle, the energy losses I was talking about at the big toe joint, and so on. And of course there are the colleagues right across the campus community, School of Sport, Exercise, Health Sciences in particular, that are working on understanding the gait, or how changes to the way athletes move, how they recover. And so it's not the nutrition and the psychology element. So they all feed into the athletic performance. But as a sports technologist, we've worked with just about everybody. You know, every major brand at some point on cushioning technologies, traction technologies, personalisation of footwear for Paralympic and disability athletes, really quite important. We might reduce injury, looking at longitudinal studies, comparing different types of cushioning or stabilisation, different brands over sort of 6 months, 12 months even, often with hundreds of athletes so that we can make comparisons over that kind of time period. So lots of fun. And then it's great to see our students, right from undergraduates who get to work perhaps with their final year studies or through placements with the big brands, both in the UK and globally, working on footwear. But in particular, the PhD students, very many of whom are working at the cutting edge of these innovations and then go on to have very successful careers working in the brands, sometimes even leading innovation and R&D teams around these types of innovation.